Hey guys, Darren Kelly, coach of Wise Ocean Pods, and welcome to the first episode of the club preview series that I'll be doing on my channel this year. If you haven't seen this sort of series before on other channels, this is the first time I'll be doing it on my channel. It is essentially where I'll be doing a deep dive of each team in the AFL, really doing a deep dive on what sort of they've done in the preseason, so obviously their ins and outs, their best 22, the direction of the club and where they're sort of heading, whether they're going up the ladder or they're, trying to bottom out and bringing in rookies, etc. I'll be discussing players that are on my watch list in this preseason, who you should be considering for your team in 2025, and also making some predictions along the way, all trying to probably fit this within 15 to half an hour, depending on the team. Obviously, some teams are a bit more relevant than others. But before I get into the video, I thought I'd just introduce myself if you haven't seen my videos before. So my name is Darren Carr. I live in South Australia. And I guess the reason why people sort of watch me, is because I am a previous winner of AFL Fantasy. I won back in 2023 after having a phenomenal year. And yeah, I ended up starting some YouTube content just because I wanted to give back to the community. And obviously I love AFL Fantasy. So I love talking about it all the time, and this is just another way of me being able to talk to you guys across the country. So yeah, that's essentially me. But yeah, let's get into the video today. All the pain. So today we'll be talking about the Adelaide Crows. Alright, that's enough of that. So yeah, today we're talking about the Adelaide Crows. So what I've got up on the screen right now is the prediction of their best 22. This is something the AFL are currently putting out at the moment on their Facebook page, just really trying to predict what their best 22 is going to be. Obviously, this is not 100% accurate. This is just the AFL. They have no knowledge of what the Crows will be doing if they're looking to make any changes. But this is, I think, a pretty good reference point of what we can start with to give us an idea of what to expect when we're thinking about the Adelaide Crows come in 2025. So, for a bit of background, the Crows finished in 15th in 2024, which is a bit of a surprise to me because I thought they weren't too bad back last year. Like, they had a few down moments, but to finish 15th in the bottom four was a bit of a surprise when I look back at the year. When you think of the worst teams, you obviously think of your West Coast, your North Melbournes, and the Tigers being the bottom three, where they had barely won any games. But there was a pretty big gap between where the Crows finished in 15th. But yeah, I think it's probably better for them. They were really in nowhere contention to finish in the top 8, so they might as well finish 15th, get the pick 4, and be able to use that for some elite talent. So obviously they're looking to climb up the ladder. I think they've done their sort of rebuild in the last probably couple years, and they're really looking to push up the ladder and potentially even push into the top 8 this year, just looking at the talent they've brought in the off season, which leads into who they brought in this year. So they have brought in Isaac Cumming, Alex Neil-Bullen, and James Peatling. Isaac Cumming coming from bloody GWS. That's weird to say. Alex Neil-Bullen came from Melbourne, and James Peatling came from GWS as well. So 3 elite talent. Well, I won't say elite talent. Very good footballers that all slot into the best 22, which you can sort of see right here. Isaac Cumming is going to be the halfback. James Peatling slots into the wing for the Adelaide Crows. Whether that's where he plays is probably a bit skeptical for me. I think he's gone to the Crows seeking for a bit more inside mid opportunity, so that's a potential. And Alex Neil-Bullen, he generally is a half forward, but he also gets some CBA usage as well, so it'll be interesting to see where that lands him. On the outs, though, they got rid of Elliot Himmelberg. That was a free agency trade. I believe he went to the Suns. They also delisted Lachlan Gallant, Will Hamill, Ned McHenry, and Patrick Parnell, and Rory Sloan retired. So not a huge amount of movement in the off-season, but definitely brought in plenty of talent. So it will be interesting to see how they approach the year. They also headed to the draft with pick 4. I guess is probably they had also pick 64, but we're really only focused on the top round picks there. So pick 4, and they pick Sid Draper, who is an elite midfielder, a South Australian boy. So he will be one to watch for a long time coming, as long as he can suit up to the AFL game. So this sort of leads me into who's on my watch list for the 2025 season in the preseason so far. So I've got about roughly 10 players that I want to discuss in this video, so strap yourselves in. First one I think we need to talk about is Jordan Dawson. He was by far the best fantasy player they had. Well, not by far, I should say. He averaged 105.3 in 2024. Price stats roughly 1,080,000. That's going to be get weird to get used to. That most players are over $1 million at this point. But yeah, so he is quite expensive. I think he's in the top 10 most expensive players in the fantasy game currently. But surprisingly, this is down on his average on 2023. So he could potentially provide a bit of value if he was to, again, capture his best performance of 2023, where he averaged 113.4. So if you look at that, he's 8 points of value just there. But you just got to sort of predict where he is going to play a little bit more. He is positioned as a mid only currently. Being the captain of the club, that also promotes him to score more points because players look for him a bit more. Trying to get those, I don't know what you'd call it, brownie points, giving the ball to the captain a little bit more. But he will be interesting for me because, again, he is a bit of value based on what he's done previously. It's just what his role is going to be. So we saw him a lot last year. He was probably first CBA usage just behind Matt Crouch, or probably even with Matt Crouch. If you look at the percentages, Matt Crouch was in front, but overall total, you have Dawson ahead. He ranged from, being 80% majority of the season to, that sort of 50 to 60 range, depending on when they needed him. They did throw him forward a little bit when they were struggling up forward. Hopefully they're not going to have as many issues up there where they don't need him to be that sort of swingman and go forward and kick goals. So I would prefer to see him just in the mids, racking up as he does, because he is an elite mark overhead. He's a big tackler, and he just leads by example from the club. So he's definitely one to watch. The other thing I wanted to sort of talk about, which is probably a little bit early to talk about, I must say, but the scale of hardness. If anyone's watched my videos before, you know how much I love the scale of hardness, so it is clinical for me to bring it in early. But looking at I'll look at the first 5 rounds, and I would say that they're probably one of the better first 5 rounds that you will get this season. So they go up against St Kilda in round 1, Essendon in round 2, North, Suns, and then the Cats. And if you remember back to last year, all 5 of those teams are relatively very friendly fantasy-wise for inside mids. Obviously, particularly North, Suns, and Essendon were probably the better ones, and even the Cats were quite easy as well. And St Kilda has their moments of being quite easy. So they actually have a pretty good run to start the season. They don't have the early rounds bye because they don't play an opening round, so you won't have to worry about their bye until round 15. So they have a pretty long stretch in the first stint of the season. So yeah, that's the other thing I wanted to mention there. So they do have a pretty good run. So that's also a big calculation for me with if I was going to start Jordan Dawson. I'm not 100% sure if that's the way I'm going to go this year currently, just because I'm really searching for that value at the first instant, just to see, okay, get the value in, and then sort of feel around that who's a little bit of value, and who do I predict to make that a little bit extra jump, or who do I expect to just be a consistent sort of captain option, because that's the other thing you got to consider. You at least want to have one sort of captain option across your team at some point. So that is Jordan Dawson. The second person I wanted to talk about, I've already spent 10 minutes talking about one player, but Matt Crouch. Obviously, he was the second highest scorer for the Adelaide Crows in 2024, averaging 101.9. He'd be priced at $1 million and 45k, so just a little over $1 million there. It definitely improved on his 2023 average, where he was sort of a bit out of flavour at the Adelaide Crows, but he definitely had a big comeback last year. He was a little bit injury ridden with, he was out for probably 8 games with an AC joint, I believe it was, which was meant to end his season, but he did come back in the later stage of the season there. He did improve on his average, though, from last year, going up by roughly 12 points there. So is there any value in him? I don't think there is, but it will be interesting to think if he can take his game to this next level. You see his scores here. They're all pretty consistent, that sort of 90 to 110 sort of zone. Had a max score of 133, and then he came back in the 4 later games in the season and probably dropped his average a little bit in what was probably his not perfect condition. What can he do after a full preseason, full fitness? Is anyone's guess. He could definitely be one that jumps up. Again, he's only mid-only, so it will clog up a midfield spot. It's just whether you see if he will jump up in value. I think he can probably average 105, so that's, 3 points of value, but probably not enough for me to risk what he's priced at currently. And, what the Adelaide Crows are going to be doing with their midfield mix, which is probably something to mention. How many mids can they fit? When you look at their CBA usage, you got Crouch, you got Dawson, you had Saligo, you had Laird, who I will lead into next. You also had Berry that came in late in that second half of the season. You had Rankine that runs in there, probably at 30 to 40%. That will probably stay consistent this year. Then you had a few other rookies that they sort of tried throughout. But then you got to think of the 3 other people they brought in Isaac Cumming, James Peatling, and Alex Neil-Bullen. How much split are they going to get? I'm going to expect James Peatling to get a bit of a bump. I think he'll probably play 50% in there as well. Neil-Bullen probably a bit lower with, say, 30%. So who is really going to be the one that loses in all this? And I predict it will be Rory Laird, which leads me to Rory Laird. He moved out of the CBAs in the back end of last season. So you can see these last 4 games, in round 21 to 24, he played 0% CBAs for majority of those games. Now, we all expect he's going to go back into this halfback role, pick up defender status, so he could definitely be a unique option if you're keen on someone that's going to pick up defender status. But you still got to remember if he is value. And for me, he is not value. When I look at it, he's priced at 99.3, just over $1 million there. This is obviously down on what his best has been with 109.2, and even the year prior to that when he was the most expensive player and the highest averaging at 120.3. So we know he's a fantasy gun. It's just when he has that position and that drive from his team to be that person. So if he's going to be this halfbacker that can rack up the ball, then absolutely he's an option. But currently for me, when we look at those 4 games where he didn't play in the midfield at all, he scored a 104, 96, 67, and a 91, which averaged 89.5 across those 4 games. So when you look at that, he's already 10 points priced above that. So that to me indicates that he's overvalued. So for me, I'm not picking him currently. I do expect him to average around that 95 range. I could be even a little bit lower with the likes of Isaac Cumming, potentially taking more points back there in the new season. So for me, I'm not super keen, especially because it's a mid only. But definitely something that we got to keep a watch on in the early stages of the preseason. The next person I wanted to talk about is Isaac Rankine. And I'll keep this one pretty short and shiny. I'm not a huge fan of Isaac Rankine. The only thing that, for me, is the forward eligibility status that he has. He's priced at 79.8 after his average last year, which is priced him at roughly 819k. He did improve on his average last season of 74.2, which we saw a pretty big bump in his CBAs. You can see he went from 2% to 38% across the season. But we saw a lot of fluctuation with his scoring. So if you just look at here, I'll highlight it there for you. First part of the season was pretty decent, where he's sort of averaging around scoring anywhere between 60 and 110. But then when he came back from injury or suspension, whatever he had during this sort of period, I think one was suspension, one was injury. And then he came back with a 45 and a 47, which is pretty daunting when you're thinking of picking someone at pretty much an 80-point price. Be one of your leading forwards. So I'm not super keen on it, especially, again, with all the likes of the other midfielders they brought in. I'm just not sure if I'm confident he's going to get these, 60%, 70% times in the midfield. I think he's just going to be that bob up every so often. Maybe he gets 30%, maybe 40% in some stages, depending on the game, where he just provides that bit of burst and a bit of speed in the midfield to get the ball moving and kick goals from there. So for those reasons, I'm not super keen on it yet, but just because he has forward status, we've got to look at it. We've got a lot of forward options that we need to address. And he is definitely one that could get a little bit of an improvement, especially if we start to see those front half earlier scoring from last year up, because he was probably averaging anywhere between 85 and 90 during this period. So that is him. Then it leads us into the newcomers. So Isaac Cumming is probably one of the more relevant of the three. And for good reason, because he is very cheap. He is priced down at 576k, and this is down on his average of 67.8 last year in 2024. And he only played 6 games, which is damning to think. He wasn't injured. I think he was just a bit out of flavour at GWS. So he's moved to a different club, seeking some new position. So we know he can be a fantasy guy. Just looking back at his past fantasy scores, he averaged upwards of 90 back in 2022, and even 83.5 in 2021 when he was that main halfback, taking a lot of kick-ins. And that's sort of the role I'm expecting from him here at Adelaide Crows. I expect him to take the kick-ins. He's got a lethal kick. He is so penetrating, so he will be the main distributor, I believe. That's probably another thing I should have pulled up. I can do real quick. The main kick-ins for the Adelaide Crows. Who was that? Where is it? Sorry, they've changed this a little bit. Here it is. So we look at this. Their main kick-in takers was Keane, being the number one, but it's a huge spread. Absolutely huge. You see a lot of different players bring it in. Rory Laird sort of popped up in the back half of last year. I think they're going to start to narrow this down a little bit and have this main person that's going to take it in. And I'm hoping it's going to be Isaac Cumming, because that's just going to make it all a lot more juicy for us when we pick him early on in the season. I already addressed that they have a great run coming up to start the season. It's even better for defenders than it is for midfielders. So definitely something that I'm looking at pretty heavily in the start of the season. So that's Isaac Cumming. He's definitely one I'm heavily looking at, and he is currently in a team that I'm drafting currently. The next person is Alex Neil-Bullen, and he's probably the least relevant of the three inclusions in my opinion. He's never been super fantasy relevant from what I can tell. He's priced at 79, so he's upwards of 800k. The only thing that makes him a little bit relevant is that he is a forward eligible. So he's a mid forward, so there's a potential that we play him as a forward, play him in our forward lines in terms of fantasy. His CBAs did see a bit of an increase in 2024, increasing 20% at Melbourne, which saw his average increased by about 7 points. So nothing major, but again, it's not a massive bump in CBAs. Now, if this is going to increase massively to, say, 40 to 50%, then it would make it a lot more relevant, because that could be a massive jump, push him into sort of the 90 range. because we have seen some pretty big games from him in the past. Again, it's just where he slots in. How do they fit all these sort of different guys in? I personally feel like he will play more of a forward role than he will play as a midfielder. It will just be that transition of when a midfielder is resting, then they will probably throw him in there, similar to what he did at Melbourne, essentially. So for those reasons, I'm not super keen on him. Just the price range throws me off a little bit as well. So that's enough about him. And the final one of the trio there is James Peatling. I didn't click on that, annoyingly. Now, Peatling is a bit more interesting as well because he was pretty fantasy relevant last year when, he popped up at GWS. He was very cheap back then and is still quite cheap now. So he's priced at 62 after averaging 64.1 last year. So that puts him at about 637k. He is only a mid only is the problem though. So that's a bit of unfortunate. I was hoping he was going to hold on to forward status, but he did play a little bit too much CBAs in the time. So even if I go to GWS, we can look at his scores and his CBA usage there. Where is he? So if you look at it here, he's popped up for some pretty good big games. So from memory, this back half of the season was where he really popped up for those big CBA games. I can show you that here. So that big stretch there from 19 to 25 is where he was probably at his best. He did pop up for a few others, 7 and 8 here and there. But that's sort of that average. He was minimum of 33, which probably an outlier. The rest were all above 80s. Even at 133 at the top. So he definitely can score. He's definitely a fantasy gun if he has got the right role. Just whether, again, if he's going to get that role, which I do expect him. He brings that sort of burst and that speed into the midfield, which I think probably replaces Rankine in there a little bit. I think they're going to allow Rankine just to stay forward and be that goal kicker that we all know he can be in the role that he's played a lot of his career so far. So that's where I see Peatling coming in. I do have a bit of a stat here. So when he averaged over 40% time in the CBAs, he averaged 88 over an 11 game span, which again was a high of 133 and a low of 33. So just going off that alone, if he gets this role of 40 plus CBAs, he is 26 points undervalued currently. So for that reason alone, he is also in my drafting team currently. So there is that one for you. And to finish off the video, I'll make these last two pretty quick because they are a little bit unknowns and ones that I'm just keeping an eye on, and that is Daniel Curtin. Apparently he is lighting up the track early on in the preseason. The only thing that is concerning for me is the role. I'm not sure where he is placed in the role. If we're looking back at this photo, they've got him just on the interchange, so he could be anywhere from the wing to the halfback to playing a bit forward, where we've seen him play all these sort of roles last year. So probably not the most fantasy relevant roles. We obviously want to see him probably more as an inside mid sort of person that really provides us. But the thing is, he is so cheap. He averaged 32.1. So if we go based off that, he would be priced at 329k. But because he only played 7 games, I believe he gets this small discount, which would price him down at 300k. I could be wrong about that. I'm not 100% sure how these rookies get priced sometimes. But at a maximum, he should be priced at 32.1 from my knowledge. Again, that could be wrong. Obviously, we don't know the prices just yet, but this is just my thinking. If he's priced anything over 400k, then I'll probably just take him off my list. But he had a max score of 63. Again, this was in a bunch of different roles that he played throughout the year, and he really didn't show a huge amount. But we know from his draft days that he definitely can be fantasy relevant for us, and because he's priced so low, that he's sort of the future. He's a top pick of last year's draft. They're going to try and use him the best they can, so he's going to get some game time. It's just where he's going to play is the thing. And the other thing that I forgot to mention is that he is forward eligible. So that makes it also interesting. And to finish it off, looking at their number 1 pick for 2025 is Sid Draper. Done a bit of research on him to just really find some data on him. So he's going to be priced at 32.3, which prices him at 331k. And he averaged 86. He averaged 86 fantasy points in the ASNFL across 6 games in 2024. So definitely a fantasy goer. He is an inside mid, so he is a mid only for us this year. He's one of the more expensive rookies that we'll have, and I think they're going to use him. I think they have to with a pick 4. They're going to blood him pretty early. They've got him on the interchange there. Again, it's just where he's going to play. Being an inside mid, does he play more of a halfback role? Has a bit of a distributor using his left foot. Using his kicking ability to move the ball forward and give him a bit more of a protection role, just letting his body grow into the game. That's probably where I see him a bit more rather than this straight inside mid, but I could be wrong on that. But I think he's definitely one that we got to keep an eye on because, yeah, again, he averaged 86 across 6 games in the men's league, and he had a max score of 118. Oh, I don't know why I got rid of that. Whoops. Don't need that anymore anyway. Max score of 118, where he laid 11 tackles and 10 tackles in the other game as well. So definitely a big tackler. Definitely has a fantasy game behind him. So he is a big watch for me as well. But yes, that sort of does it for this video. This sort of does a big deep dive on the Adelaide Crows. So if I just want to quickly summarize who I'm really watching, Jordan Dawson, Matt Crouch, Rory Laird, Isaac Rankine, Cumming, Alex Neil-Bullen, Peatling, Curtin, and Draper. I currently have 3 of these guys in my team, where I think they're going to have massive seasons and they're going to provide us plenty of value and provide us plenty of scoring throughout the season. So yeah, hopefully that even you guys have enjoyed and have picked up some few things here and there based on the knowledge I've given you. And yeah, we'll see what happens as the preseason develops. It's the 14th of December, so anything could happen. Injuries could happen, and that could open up more points and more spots for people as well. So we're still a long way to go, but there is a lot to happen at the Crows. It's a very exciting time for their team and expecting them to fly up the ladder this year. But that will do it for me, guys. I hope you guys have enjoyed. I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace. Bye.